the Iron Sheik, mustache, A to the Z, brother.
Because you suck.
Everything. Just how he ended up with a second career of just being just a crazy dude. But I'm trying to think, when was the first time you would have met the Sheik? Would it have been in the WWF? Because Sergeant Slaughter, of course, wouldn't it? Because he turned up.
1990. Of course, growing up in the Northeast, I was until we got cable, I was watching the WWE show, so I was very well aware of Iron Sheik. When I was there in '90, by then Cosmo's knees were starting to go bad. And so he loved working with young guys like me because he could stand in the middle of the ring and you do all the motion. He'd clothesline you and do this and do that and didn't have to do much. And he loved it, and I was happy that I could do that because I respected him. And, just a little sidebar for the kids that say they can't learn anything from the legends. Understand the legends tended the business, grew the business, handed you an industry that you could step into and make the money you're making. Nobody expects respect, but by all due respect, guys like Cosmo, guys like Billy, guys like Dominic, guys like Bruno, guys like on, they all earned their respect, by running the roads and leaving that business. So I worked with Cosmo quite often. Back then we were doing on the weekends, the matinee shows, Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, then take your gear off and put it back on wet that night. It was terrible. Putting on cold, damp, wet tights. But I always got along fantastic. And it's hard for me to gauge it because they never came to me and said, "Oh, hey, you're Dominic's kid." So, but I think because of my connection to Dominic, Andre took an immediate liking to me. All those guys, Pat Patterson, all those guys took an immediate liking, and not in the way some fans are thinking, because there was never a time like when they were yelling at me or, even when I screwed stuff up. But with Cosmo, with Sheiky, my favorite story that I personally witnessed, we were in Richfield Coliseum in Cleveland, outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio, and Marty, his knees are bad. So Marty Jannetty keeps leg diving him from behind, and Cosmo was always talking about his background and he could stretch anybody and everything. So Marty's this is the kind of stupid stuff you do when you're trying to kill a day when you got to be there noon till God knows what hour. And she kept telling him, "Oh, you motherfucker." And finally the last time he goes to his bag and ripping his bag open, he pulls this thing out. It looks like a letter opener, but it looks like a little Arabian sword. It's a little like curved thing like this. So he starts after Marty. And he can't move very fast. So Marty's running backwards and he's like doing this like in Cosmo's face, right? And he's chasing him through the whole building, swinging that little letter opener at him. And Marty gets away from him, runs around the corner of the Orient Express is standing there. Pat Tanaka, Paul Diamond, and Mr. Fuji. So Marty runs around, grabs Paul Diamond's mask, puts his mask on. So now there's Mr. Fuji. There's Paul Diamond with no mask. Pat Tanaka. And Marty Jannetty with the mask on. So he comes around the corner and goes, Mr. Fuji, most honorable. He goes, "Have you seen that motherfucking Marty Jannetty? I'm going to kill that motherfucker." And Fuji, they all go, "No." He goes, Paul goes, "Hmm?" And he looks at back and looks at Marty with Paul's mask on. And Marty goes, so he runs that way. Marty leg dives him again and takes the mask off, and Cosmo's ready to have a stroke. He was such a funny guy. But the fans always hear these gruff stories. The "I'll kill that motherfucker" or that kind of thing. And everybody in wrestling does a Cosmo imitation. But he loved the business. He loved being in front of the fans. And I think when he would react out like on Twitter, understand this was not his first language, right? So he's speaking in idioms that he's heard over and over, and sometimes getting messed up. Like Dominic used to say, kill two stones with one bird, things like that, because it's a new language, even though that's what I said to Dominic. I said, "You've been in this country longer than I've been alive and you still can't speak English, but you speak all these other languages." So, Cosmo, but he also knew and was well aware of, being from Iran and, the geopolitical ramifications of that and where wrestling was and how strong kayfabe still was then. He was the perfect villainous anti-hero right? For people to latch on to, and really for someone like Hogan or whatever was a great hand to put in there, or Sarge to put in there as the Iraq War's going on. It was just one of those things that all the stars lined up right for Cosmo, but he also had not been in good health for years, and he, not that you wanted to hear it or expected to hear it, but these guys lived full lives, and you start getting them to your 80s and 90s, especially if you've done this business for as long as they've done it. And in Cosmo's case, how many years or decades of amateur wrestling before that? Excuse me. So, a lot of wear and tear on the bodies. But when these guys go, a little bit more of our industry dies with them, because they take their experience with them. So, our business, I think, is in a precarious place right now, because we're watching all these true giants, legends, and icons just one by one leaving. And each time the experience level of the business sort of closes down more and more. And it's my concern, because I'm sure you've heard me on plenty of interviews talking about the kids today. And I always try to stress, I'm not criticizing, because I know that they hadn't been taught like we'd been taught. Keep your mouth shut and eyes and ears open, and those kind of things. I don't care if it's ditch digging. I don't care if it's doing podcasts, teaching, wrestling. It doesn't matter. If somebody's done something for 40, 50 years, I guarantee you, absolute 1,000,000%, that person can teach you something. If you're a first day ditch digger, that guy's been doing it for 30, 40, 50 years, can surely teach you a few things. I want to see, as I get older and more wrinklier and fatter, as much as I love wrestling, I want to see what these kids would pull out if they had been under the type of tutelage we had been under, and knowing when to put those moves in, knowing when not to put those moves in, when to speed up, slow down. I was watching some stuff last night on cable. It was right around the time that Bobby was carrying the TNA belt, Bobby Roode. And as I was watching him, I'm looking at his mannerisms and thinking to myself how excited I was sitting in the back the first day he had broken away from Team Canada and was being Bobby Roode. And he's pounding a mud hole in whoever it was he was working with, and the crowd's chanting against him, yelling, and he stops, raises his hand, he stops, and slowly glares at the crowd. The hairs on my arm stood up, because I thought, my God, this kid's got it. Wow. Like, you can't teach that. And, I'd love to see what these kids would produce with their athleticism that is through the roof, if they would just take a second to listen to Art, to listen to Jerry, to listen to Billy or Dean, because I assure you those guys can probably teach you something.